Hey guys, it's Snowbiter, and I've got another Battlefield 3 video here for you guys. The gameplay in this video is going to be some highlights from a round of Conquest on Strega Karkand. And I'm using the M416. I've got the underslung rail and heavy barrel attached to it. And the gameplay it's actually kind of long. It's about 15 minutes, even though I did actually have to cut some stuff out. I had about a half an hour's worth of gameplay recorded from this round, and even then, I actually think I had joined this round late. I think the actual round lasted something like an hour or something around that long, which seems kind of long. This must have been a high-ticket server, so I joined this round pretty late, and I still ended up doing pretty well. I actually think I might end up getting the first place in the server, even though I joined the round halfway through. I'm not sure. I'll have to look at the scoreboard, but. So this is just some highlights, and normally I wouldn't like to do a commentary over a video that's this long, so I'm not sure. I probably won't be talking for the entire length of this video. I'll probably stop for around like maybe 10 minutes, and then you guys can just watch the rest of the gameplay after that. And one other thing I wanted to mention quickly is I did add some color correction to this video. It's been a while since I've done something like that, and I do kind of like to, from time to time, just try and edit a little bit, and especially mess around with the colors. I kind of like to do that, so I may get back to doing that a little more often. So what I wanted to talk about in this video was not so much related to this gameplay. I started to do this a little bit in the last commentary that I posted, but I want to start to talk more about Battlefield 3 as a game in general, as opposed to talking about tips and strategies about the various weapons and maps. And I realized I never actually talked too much about what I think about Battlefield 3 as a game. And so, just to give you guys a quick intro into the topic of this video, so the first Battlefield game that I actually played was Battlefield 1942, but I never actually played the multiplayer. I would only really play the single player with a friend of mine, a real-life friend, I should say. And I continued doing that into Battlefield 2, and then I started to play a little bit of the multiplayer in Battlefield 2, but I never really got into it. And so Battlefield 2042 was really the first Battlefield game that I played a lot of multiplayer in. And even then, I actually bought the game, I think, a year or maybe even 2 years after it came out. And I still actually played it for a solid 2 years, 2 or 3 years really. And that actually just gives you a sense of how long that game really lasted. And one thing I think is kind of interesting is games really don't last that long anymore. I mean, you look at the Call of Duty franchise. That's they pump out one Call of Duty every year pretty much, and the game has a 1-year lifespan, and then it's on to another game. And I think you sort of started to see, or you're starting to see that with Battlefield as well. I mean, Battlefield Bad Company 2 was released, I guess it's 2 years ago now, and it's pretty much dead at this point. And once Battlefield 3 came out, I don't think that I'm sure there were still a few servers populated, but people were mostly, I think, moved on to Battlefield 3. Anyway, the reason I wanted to talk about that is because I find that Battlefield Bad Company 2 I almost don't really consider to be a game in the Battlefield series, because it's so different from the previous Battlefields that I was used to playing. But if you're comparing Battlefield 3 to, say, Battlefield 2042, because that's the one that I played the most of, or even Battlefield 2, I like the older Battlefields better. And I was thinking a little bit about this and about why that's the case. And I think there are a couple of reasons. So the one that I want to talk about in this video is the map design. And I'll talk a little bit more about probably other stuff in other videos. But what I want to focus on in this video is the map design of the maps in Battlefield 3. So I basically want to compare, or if you compare the base maps in Battlefield 3 to the maps in Back to Karkand, because the maps in Back to Karkand are essentially unchanged from the way they were in Battlefield 2, so they're older maps really, and I find that the Back to Karkand maps play a lot better than the newer maps that are just in the base Battlefield 3 game. And you know, so if you compare, say, Strike at Karkand, which I think, or I consider to be a more infantry-oriented map. I know it does have tanks on it in it and APCs, but I still think it's more of an infantry-oriented map. And if you compare that to, you know, I think in the base game, I'd say both, or Operation Metro, Grand Bazaar, and Sen Crossing are probably the three mostly infantry-oriented maps in the base game. And if you compare this map to those three, you know, obviously, right off the bat, this map is clearly a lot bigger than any of those maps. And, you know, it feels like, I think one problem I have with some of the Battlefield 3 base maps is that when you're playing with, even with 32 players on some of those maps, it can feel, especially, I mean, it's not as bad actually with 32 players, but, you know, anything more than that I think just starts to feel really crowded on some of those maps. And, you know, for some reason I think a lot of people like to play on the 64-player servers, but the reason I don't is it just feels like there's too many players in that server. It just gets oversaturated with players, so there's no room really to use any tactic or strategy. And I've always thought of Battlefield as a game that you should be able to use a certain amount of tactics or a certain level of strategy. And it's not like you're constantly getting overwhelmed or just swarmed by enemies, which I think happens a lot on 64 players on the base maps. And you know, it still does happen, I think, on Strike at Karkand if you play it on 64 players, but I don't think it's as bad. And you know, even just with 32 players, I think that this map just sort of flows better. And so another thing I wanted to point out about Strike at Karkand, if you compare it to any of the three maps that I named earlier, Operation Metro, Grand Bazaar, and Sen Crossing, it's a much more open map. And what I mean by that is there aren't nearly as many choke points as there are in the newer maps. And you know, I mean, especially in particular Operation Metro, which is really just one big choke point of a map. And I mean, Sen Crossing, I think, to a lesser extent, that's not quite as bad. But Grand Bazaar really also has choke points. I mean, if you think of the B flag, there's that long corridor, and you know, there are a couple of different ways to get to that corridor, or that hallway or that alleyway. But there's really, I mean, it's a choke point really. It's not like you can move around or go around to get to right on the B flag. You have to go through that alleyway to get to the flag. And the reason I think this isn't such a great thing is because, one, it encourages people to camp, because there's a limited number of ways that the enemy can come from. And so, you know, it just makes it easier to defend flags, and it makes it harder to flank the enemy because you have a limited number of routes to take. And when you have a limited number of routes to take, and it makes it harder to flank, then it's, you know, essentially, you know, it's in Operation Metro is, I think, an extreme case of this, but essentially it becomes suicide to try to advance on the enemy or to try to move around the map. And I mean, because of the design of Operation Metro, it's impossible basically to do that anyways. But I mean, you know, if you try to move up on that map, it's just about your guaranteed death. You're just basically trying to get yourself killed, especially when you're playing on, you know, a larger server or a larger server size. You know, I think Sen Crossing is a little better, and you know, it's a little more open, but still it just doesn't feel quite as open as Strike at Karkand. I mean, if you look at this map, first of all, there are also 7 flags, which is something else I wanted to point out, because each of the Back to Karkand maps has 7 flags, and this is on Conquest Large, I should mention. You know, I think all this stuff that I'm talking about is even worse on Conquest Small. And you know, it's even harder to flank on most of the Conquest Small versions of these maps, or of the base maps. And so, you know, that's why I'm typically playing Conquest Large, because I just think Conquest Small is, you know, there are even more choke points, and it makes it even harder to move around the map. You know, but I mean, back to what I was saying about the flags. You know, there are 7 flags on each of the Back to Karkand maps, whereas there are only 5 on both Grand Bazaar and Sen Crossing, and only 3 on Operation Metro. So, you know, that again means that there's less reason to go after flags, because, you know, if you're just holding on Operation Metro, if you're holding 2 flags, you have no reason to go after the third, because you're going to get the ticket bleed in your favor. You know, similarly on the for Grand Bazaar and Send Crossing, it increases the value of just one flag, and so having fewer flags increases the value of just one flag, and so that means that people have less reason to try to go after some of these other flags. Having fewer flags also discourages people from, especially depending on the server size, it makes it harder, or it discourages people from going after other flags because there's no way, as I said earlier, there's no way to flank really on some of these maps the way they're built, and it makes it harder to actually capture a flag. Whereas I think it should be easier to capture flags than it really is, and it's kind of interesting because I think to a certain extent DICE captured that with the close quarters expansion, because flags exchange hands very quickly on that map, or on those maps in the close quarters DLC. But if you look at Operation Metro, I'm going to keep using that as an example because it's the most popular infantry oriented map in the game. But if you look at that, flags almost rarely exchange hands, and it's most games are pretty much a stalemate between the two teams. And I think Battlefield is a game where it works the best when you have the teams constantly exchanging flags, and you're constantly running around trying to capture these flags. Whereas the thing, as I talked about earlier, with the fewer flags, it turns the game more and more into something more like team deathmatch, because it's less about the objectives and it's more about just getting kills. And I think Operation Metro is one of those maps that kind of turns it into just being about getting the kills. Send Crossing and Grand Bazaar, because there are 5 flags, it's not as bad, but the choke points, I think, do make it a little harder to have this sort of flow of gameplay that, as I was talking about earlier, where you can really move about the map and go out and capture flags. So basically, what I'm trying to say is I think that more flags are better. It makes for better gameplay, and there's more reason for people to move around the map. And I also think that more open maps where you have more flank routes are also better, because otherwise you start to get this sort of camping and gameplay that discourages people from actually going after objectives. So I think that's part of the reason why I don't really like some of the maps, really most of the maps I think in the base Battlefield 3 game. I'm not saying they're all bad. I think I think Grand Bazaar and Send Crossing are probably my 2 favorite maps to play. But some of the other ones, I mean, Damavin Peak, if you think about that map, it has the tunnel, which, kind of like Operation Metro, is just one big choke point. Although I think it does work a little differently once you start to get into the more vehicle-oriented maps. Although I will say that I think, if you look at Operation Firestorm, I think the vehicle maps would also be a little better if the flags were a little more spread out. I mean, Operation Firestorm, the flags are pretty close together. And I mean, I think part of the reason that sometimes these maps feel like they're sort of really close, they feel smaller than they actually are, is I think because of because of the server size, but also because of the spotting mechanic in the game. I mean, it makes it so that if you spam your Q button, you can really see anybody at pretty long ranges, and I mean, you can shoot at somebody that you probably wouldn't really see otherwise. So that's something I'll probably end up talking about in another video, because I think the fact that you can spot somebody, the fact that there's 3D spotting in this game, really sort of makes it, I think it takes away from the gameplay, I guess. So I'll probably go into more detail about that in a future video. But anyway, I actually did end up talking for most of this video. So hopefully you guys found what I had to say interesting, and let me know what you guys think about what I said. If you agree, disagree, if you actually prefer the style of an Operation Metro or Grand Bazaar map with the choke points, or if you sort of think in the same line that I do. So let me know what you guys think about what I've talked about, if you have any thoughts. And otherwise, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I know it was kind of long. In the future, I'll try to cut these down a little shorter, but I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.